Welcome back to Gold Derby. I'm Christopher Rosen. I'm joined now by JT Rogers and Ansel Elgort, the creator and star of Tokyo Vice, which we were just saying here before we started was just renewed today. We're recording this on a Tuesday for season 2. So congratulations, both of you, on the season 2 news. As a viewer, I was desperate for that news because it ends on such a cliffhanger. I guess we could start there, JT, just broadly for season 2. You know, like I'm sure you've been thinking about it and stuff, but what could you say in these very, very early stages about what you want to do with the show? Because
are you kidding me? I'm not going to tell you jack. What are you talking about? I'm not going to tell you anything. The short answer is, of course, we know where we're going. Absolutely. And we're working on it and we're very excited. Ansel and I were just texting giddily yesterday. But all I will promise is there are twists and turns in the tale. And there'll be as many surprises as in season 2. But yes, we will. All the questions and more will be answered. I'm really, really excited to be back to work on it.
For both of you, actually, on this, watching the season, I was like, without knowing if it was going to come back, obviously, for season 2, I found it really, I don't know if it was risky is the right word, but I was like, wow, leaving so many balls up in the air is such a gambit from a storytelling perspective, but it really works for the show and where it was going. Ansel, when you were reading the finale and stuff, were you surprised that it just ends like the way it does? And I guess JT, when you were writing, like ending it like that again, like without a definitive ending for a lot of the characters, but somehow still making it work to feel like a single season. I just found that really compelling as a viewer. And I guess for both of you, how did you kind of think of that, how the show ended?
Well, I always knew, obviously, the show opens in the pilot with Jake sitting down with the Yakuza, and then it jumps back to, what was it, 2 years later, JT?
Yeah, 2 years ago. Yeah.
And I always knew that we were never going to get back to that scene until season 2. Yeah. And that's something that, it's awesome that this show has been so well received. Like, so many people in daily life come up to me and say, Tokyo Vice. But then everyone says, I finished it, though. We never even got back to the sit down with the Yakuza. What's going on? We need a season 2. So
I mean, I will give props to HBO Max, because when I sat down and said, look, here's the script, but here's what I want to do. And it's going to take 2 stories to get through what I have already come up with. And we're going to not get to that scene from the get-go. And we're going to really use a long form. And so, yes, there was always a risk, right? Of course, that I'd feel pretty bad, and I have a lot of people hating on me if we really ended at the end of 8 episodes. But it's worked out the way we all wanted, from the get-go, from the first time, you and I talked, Ansel. So it's pretty exciting.
Yeah. So obviously, JT, you're friends with based on the book by Jake Adelstein. You're friends with him in real life, I know. And what was it about Ansel that you felt like was the right mix to play a guy obviously so well, or what was it about Ansel then that made you kind of think he was right?
It's interesting, right? It's really about Ansel being a terrific actor and Ansel having the qualities that I thought were wonderful in the sort of Jake of the series, inspired by the book as opposed to actual Jake, So it's a funny thing. Ansel has towers over real Jake, and it's so great for the show. As we've talked about how tall Ansel is, because it just adds this layer constantly of the outsiderness. And you couldn't make that up if you were trying to cast it. You just, Ansel becomes available and we meet and we hit off. I'm like, oh gosh, I would love it if you would do the part. So it is, and we've worked on it so long that there's Jake in real life, and there's, as real Jake calls him, Taj, the other Jake, the Ansel JT Jake. You know what I mean? And so it takes on a life of its own. And when I think about the show, like now we're going to all I do is picture Ansel in my head, because Ansel is the embodiment. Ansel is the 3-dimensional life heartbeat of Jake now.
Right.
And from the beginning, it was sort of like, you're going to meet Jake Adelstein, the real guy, but we definitely you're not playing him, you're playing this character.
Yeah.
And based off, I read the book, obviously, and then reading JT's scripts and the conversations that we had. And it was like, we know this guy's really driven, and there's aspects of the real Jake, like the fact he's a little bit of a hustler, and he's a little bit he definitely has a little bit of self-interest in there too, which I did like pulling from the real Jake. Me and the real Jake actually went out, and I shadowed him while he was writing a story, like a real story. And I saw how he operated, and it was very much like he was bending all the rules. He was getting into rooms that he didn't really have permission to be in, but he was kind of talking his way in. And that was inspiring. But at the same time, they never wanted me to be like, you're not imitating this guy. It's not like he's a real public figure, so it doesn't matter. It's more just the character.
Right. Ansel, you mentioned like that, like kind of shadowing Jake. I know you also, I think I read other interviews, you shadowed journalists in LA, right? For like how to be like a crime beat reporter, I guess. Can you like, what did I be like, how did that help the character? And then like, what did you learn about journalism in general that you were maybe surprised by in the process or anything?
Yeah, well, I shadowed a journalist with the LA Times, James Quealy. Michael Mann set me up with this private investigator who had previously worked with the LA Times, who kind of put me through like a week of crash course journalism, starting from a police report and then adding color to it, triple checking information. You need to have like, yeah, 3 sources tell you that something is true. You can't just take facts for granted. And then learning about putting people on background or quoting people directly, going out into the street, talking to people, because then we actually did write a real story based off of a police report that we pulled up it was fresh that day. Went out into the street. I attempted to do interviews. Sometimes it was a hard no, but I was with this guy who was the private investigator at this point, and he just had a camera. He was posing as a photographer. And I would kind of go and say, hey, sorry, man, they said I couldn't get anything. He said, go back in there and make an excuse and get a quote out of them. You need to get it. And it worked. And I went back and I said, I'm so sorry. My boss is going to kill me. I have a 5 p.m. deadline. I could put you on background so they'll never know it was you. I really need to add a little color to the story. And I'm going to get fired if I don't get the story. You know what I mean? And then they said, okay, fine. And also offering to buy them lunch too. So I said, I'll buy you a sandwich. He said, all right, I get off at, okay, 1:00, come back, I'll meet you outside, and he gave me the count of what happened. And I said, I can quote you, not quote you, but I'll put you on background. I said, okay, and that, so just being able to kind of get my feet wet in that real way. Then when I was, and then when we went to Japan, I was able to shadow Jake. I shadowed another reporter, Chaggy. And we were, just being able to do that when we were actually filming, I felt comfortable doing it. And then if something felt like, oh, this doesn't feel quite real, I was able to pull from a real experience. So that was really helpful.
That's amazing. Do you have like also like, I mean, JT was mentioning this too, how long you guys worked on this show? I mean, I think it was announced in like 2019. Obviously, you had a big break because of the pandemic as well. When you're playing a character that long as an actor, have you gotten to do that previously? I guess I don't think so, because obviously movies are different than a television series. But like, how much do you learn about, like, do you feel like comfortable, or did you get more comfortable playing Jake as like, time went on and stuff?
Definitely. Especially in terms of like the language, I really try. First, I started learning the lines phonetically, and then realized it wasn't quite enough. So really started taking language classes, and then living in Japan. Once we were actually living in Japan and shooting the show, and the crew is Japanese, and making Japanese friends, and I like to play basketball, so I go to the park, and then everyone there is like just kids in the park playing basketball, and they speak a different way, and it's like, once I was immersed in the character like that, okay, yeah, we're shooting 8 hours of television. We were there for 8 months straight. Previously, the longest shoot I've done is maybe 4. So you definitely start to get more and more comfortable in the character. And then, like you mentioned, the shutdown too. I was able to, from America, then continue to do Zoom classes with Homa Sensei, my language teacher, and just like prepare as much as possible for this character, which was great. And now with season 2, it's like I'm going to be even more comfortable. And so it is a really different experience and really cool experience. And I feel like it allows me to put my best foot forward as an actor, to have all that time to prepare and continue to sink into the character.
Yeah. JT, I want to ask you, obviously talking about this and like from a Jake perspective and Ansel's prep work, the thing I think a lot of people love about the show is the specificity, where it's like you have all these very specific communities and like very like that are set in their ways, like the Yakuza, even the newsrooms, just 90s Japan, I feel like. Can you talk about making sure every one of those little communities felt so authentic? Because I think that's something that I really, as a viewer, enjoyed, and I think others as well did. So I guess I'd love to hear you talk about how you kind of made sure it was so authentic.
Well, from the beginning of wanting to make a project out of material, I went, it's a number of years ago now, and went and sort of lived with Jake and shadowed him for weeks, and met lots and lots of ex-Yakuza and current cops and journalists, and then people, especially who were working with him at the time. And then, in writing the scripts, we had Japanese journalist consultants and, Japanese speaking writers as well. And then, it is Ansel and I both know now, it's the first time both of us have done a TV series, is it takes an army, and it's a collective endeavor on an extraordinary level, you know. And yes, I wrote and created the show, but you've got to have people surrounded you who are experts, and not just in, you know, your incredible actors and DPs and directors and crew, but we would have consultants we would constantly speak with, and they would be on set. Talk about, you know, is this detail correct? How we, you know, we constantly, to the point where sometimes I would pull whatever is left of my hair out. We'd have to stop the show, and the entire seeming crew would have to discuss the tense of a particular line translated from English to Japanese. And yeah, it drives you a little batty, but it's because everyone cares, because everyone is so invested in the show, and everyone wants it to be a show where that you know, I'm thrilled that you feel that way about the show, and thank you for that. But I think, I'm sure I could speak for everyone who was working on it, that, well, your ideal is that a woman who was a journalist in the late 90s would watch this at home in Tokyo and say, holy cow, that's what it looked like. That's what it, you know, I mean, I knew we were I remember one of the benchmarks early on when you're at sea going, you know, we're getting this right, is this going to work? Is Real Jake came to the set of the newsroom, not the newsroom, but the police, sort of the branch of the newsroom in the police headquarters. And he came in, and he was so overwhelmed by the verisimilitude of the exactness of it that he had to sit down. He's like, I literally feel like I'm in a time capsule. I'm kind of lightheaded. This is exactly what it looked like. And I was like, okay.
That's really,
check that off the list.
Yeah.
Check that off the list. But no, it was a collective endeavor, and it will be again for season 2.
Right. Yeah, I want to ask you. Obviously, Michael Mann directed the pilot. Having him have putting his stamp, I think, on the first episode is really key, and obviously got, I think, a lot of people maybe interested in the show as well, right? Because like he has such a fan base and stuff. How did you use what he did in that first episode throughout the remaining, you know, 7 episodes? Like, how did he set it up for you?
A lot of the locations. I mean, it's interesting. The design of the show is a little bit out of the box in that I wanted thematically with the show, I wanted to create a first episode, and this is why Michael was so extraordinary at that has this sort of, you know, his incredible visual style and his rigor and his specificity, which Ansel knows at least better than I from working with him so hip to hip. But there's an element of, like, on one hand, we create all the locations in the worlds that we dug in for that are built out, you know, from Michael's episode. And then there's an element midway through the second episode where the audience goes, oh, gee, all those people that seem ancillary in the first episode are actually main characters. In fact, they're leading roles. In fact, the show is about all sorts of things I didn't realize. Because one of the things about the show is pay attention and things are not what you've seen. So it was both, but ultimately the sort of condensing of the DNA of the show, so much of it was set up in the first episode. And, you know, Michael deserves enormous credit for that. Certainly.
Yeah.
It's great.
Ansel, how about you for a performance aspect? I know you've kind of talked about it as well, but like working with Michael Mann, one of the top filmmakers, like how did he influence, I guess, your performance throughout the rest of the series?
Yeah, I mean, also just being around his energy and work ethic. You know, he's a guy who's up at like 5 or 6 a.m. He's in the gym doing pull-ups, even though he's in his 70s. He has a stack of papers like bigger than you've ever seen anyone carry around that basically has the days. He has all these tape recorders. He's tape recording everything. And then he has his poor assistant transcribe it all night. And then the next day he has all his everything that was recorded transcribed. And then he highlights things and says, oh, because it might be a good thing to slip in as a line, or just like just a good idea. But he's just kind of, it's a almost comically obsessive, his attention to detail and his work ethic. And that obviously rubbed off on me. When we first went to Japan, we went just for about a week, and I was in Aikido crash course, like 3 hours a day. And it was really intense. It was like after 2 hours, I was already like so lightheaded I couldn't even see, and it's still getting pushed, you know. And it was kind of like, definitely that's Michael, you know, being like, push this guy as hard as he possibly can be pushed. And I love that. And, you know, I had heard stories. I spoke to Spielberg before I worked with Michael, and spoke to Jamie Foxx, and they were both basically like, this guy is no BS. Like, you have to like put your best foot forward, and like then you guys will get along great. But like, if you're not going to work the hardest you've ever worked in your life, like, he will destroy you. And I was like, all right. So I just went in there ready to like, I'm gonna like try to out hustle this guy, which was impossible, even though he's in his 70s. But, you know, so that kind of was great. And then, like you said, like, you know, everybody had that energy. We had a great prep. He's obsessed with prep. I know he was always wanting more and more prep. And then the other directors see the pilot and they're inspired to try to make some, like, something that a master made. And I mean, Hikari is, I think, an incredible director, probably one day will be considered a master. Joseph has done an incredible job. And Alan Poole was an amazing fit for this because he speaks fluent Japanese. He's totally in the culture. So, but yeah, definitely everybody was certainly inspired by being able to work with the great Michael Mann.
JT, did you have the Pearl Jam release in there, or was that Michael Mann?
No, that was Michael's. He loves his Pearl Jam.
Me too. That's why I was like,
yeah.
When I saw that, I was like, hell yeah, this show is for me because I'm a huge Pearl Jam fan. I was like, yes.
Well, we did it for you, Chris. We hand selected that for you, so I'm glad you saw that.
I want I guess for JT, you writing it, and then also Ansel, obviously the relationship between Jake and Katagiri is so key, and I love the way it kind of like fluctuates throughout the series. I guess JT, from writing that, like what would you think? Like, how did you, obviously based, I'm sure, on the source material, but how did you like kind of like think of their relationship? And definitely, obviously, like the way that we'll obviously get back to that in season 2. But I guess for season 1,
I mean, I never met the real who's in the book and played a really important part in real Jake's life. I never met him for all the times I was in Japan, but I'd heard about him for years and years, so I knew all about him and his importance, and was just struck by this father figure / elder brother character that real Jake still mention him in conversation, like, well, as he once said to me, the way you would about your father after he's passed, because he passed a number of years ago from cancer. And that relationship just felt, you just early days of trying to find the spine of the show and what will the audience connect to, what's meaningful to me, because ultimately, if you were to write a Tokyo Vice series, it would just be different because it would come through you in the way that this is the Tokyo Vice that came through me as a writer. And so that was just important. And Ken is such a wonderful actor. And I went to him backstage in London and brought the script and asked if he'd do the show. And so once you had Ken and Ansel, and you sort of, that's a spine, that's a hook you can build things on. And then it was really, it was exciting. And, and as Ansel did such an extraordinary job learning Japanese. And I think he's not really he's being too modest. I mean, he really just stunned the crew, how good he was. And it gave such freedom, those scenes with Ken and Ansel, they're so dense, a lot of them, in terms of the story we're relaying to the audience. And even with that, we would sit down together, right? And so we were like, well, what if we did this? And Ansel, to his credit, like, well, could I do this in Japanese instead of English? And I was okay. And first, like, well, you know what? You're right. That's actually a good idea. Why don't we try it both ways? And let's, on the edit, we have that freedom to sort of move back and forth between languages the way people who are really multilingual can, which I think adds a real verisimilitude to the show. And, whenever we were doing the scenes with the two of them, I was like, oh, great. This is going to be a good day. This is going to be a good day for me.
Yes.
Just sort of, I can hang the show on these scenes.
Yeah, all those scenes I always tried, if it was with Ken, with Katagiri, I felt like Jake would be trying to pay him the respect. And also because they were speaking of such serious matters, that Jake would be speaking in Japanese. Now, what ended up happening is that then Ken wanted to speak in English, of course, because he had learned the lines in English. But I also wanted to speak in Japanese because I had learned the lines in Japanese. So we would,
So I was between them.
So I we would do takes in both English and Japanese. But what was also interesting is, like you said, the relationship fluctuates. And there is one, there was a few scenes where, okay, this is a scene where Jake is a little bit disobeying Katagiri. This is a scene where there's tension in the relationship. And to kind of play with that, I remember there was one day where Ken sort of said to me, I think that you should do the scene in English. And I said, well, but I can do it in Japanese too, and he was like, no, this one's better in English. I said, well, maybe I'll do it in both. He was kind of like shaking his head, because this is in Japan. Ken Watanabe, obviously he's the most legendary actor in Japan, and Japan is a linear society. So if as Ken Watanabe, you say to a younger actor, I think you should do it in English. And if he says that to a Japanese actor, they bow and say, arigatou gozaimasu. That's it. Like, thank you very much. And you're right. But I'm Ansel and I'm Jake and I'm an American. So when even sometimes to even get under Ken's skin a little bit, we were doing a take and and he asked if I would please do it in English, and I did the entire take in Japanese. And that definitely got a little rise out of him, and we ended up using that take in the show. And we're all good. At the end, you know, Ken gives me a little thumbs up, and we're having fun, we're playing. But just having that kind of freedom to play, and, you know, Ken being multilingual, me trying really hard, it like kind of feels like Jake, you know, like wanting to do that, like having that hunger, wanting to speak in Japanese and in English, wanting to prove himself to Katagiri that he's not his boy, that, you know, they're working together on this. And then that ends up pissing off Katagiri, and they have that falling out. I think that, you know, it adds an interesting tension to that relationship.
Yeah, for sure it does. And I know we have to wrap up here. So I just want to go on a light note. Obviously, there's a scene where you and Sho Kazumatsu, who plays Sato, which I love that character, and the actor is great as well, arguing between Backstreet Boys and NSYNC. Which would you actually take now? JT, you can answer this as well. I do not want to age discriminate here at all.
Oh, thanks, man.
I would do Backstreet Boys, I think.
Oh man. Dude, Backstreet? Are you kidding me? Dude, if you like Backstreet Boys, you gotta listen to NSYNC.
Yeah, there you go.
You ever heard of Justin Timberlake, man? That guy's dope.
He's good solo. He's good. No, that's fine.
But that was such a funny scene, because even me too was like, you know, there's a little bit like, okay, is Ken Watanabe is a serious show, and then we're doing the scene where we're singing Backstreet Boys in a car, and it was perfect, because I was even already kind of like, are you kidding me? Backstreet Boys? So
it's really great.
Again, they were
it's
parallel.
A great scene. Yeah, JT. I mean, can you talk about like? I thought that is a great scene.
You know, that's the writer's prerogative. Is you love all your children. You love all your children. You love them all equally. It's good.
Yeah. JT Rogers and Ansel Elgort, star and creator of Tokyo Vice, renewed for season 2. Season 1, all the episodes are streaming on HBO Max. Thank you both for doing this great show.
Thank you, Chris, so much.
Thank you.
Have a lovely day.